Hello, everyone. Karibu, karibu. You are all welcome to this discussion about Ubuntu and its place in social work and development. Once again, my name is Eriya, and I am the technical personnel on this project. And I am also a proud student of social work on my master's at Makerere University. And today we have someone who is still going to share about Ubuntu and its place in social work and development. And he is very knowledgeable in this area. So could you please introduce yourself to the viewers?
Oh, thank you, Eriya, for having me. My name is Robert Kudakwashe Chigangaidze. I'm originally Zimbabwean, and I'm a qualified social worker by training. And currently, I've recently defended my PhD on Ubuntu philosophy and its relevance to social work practice. It is an honor and privilege to be here. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that ample introduction of who you are. And to dive into our discussion, we shall be discussing about different things concerning Ubuntu. And my first question to you is, could you please tell us about how you first interfaced to Ubuntu, or what was Ubuntu like to you when they introduced it to you? And I understand you're from Zimbabwe. Could you share your understanding of Ubuntu right from the Zimbabwean perspective?
Oh, thank you so much. Ubuntu mainly means UNU, but is not also limited to UNU, where we say the way of living, the way of doing things, our daily interactions with colleagues, with family members, with the community, with nature, and also with the Most High. Ubuntu, from a Zimbabwean perspective, is that way of life, how you express yourself in terms of your humanness, how you interact with others in terms of ethical conduct, and also not limited to aspects to do with communality, kindness, justice, human rights, forgiveness, and those value systems that shape us more into becoming more human. So Ubuntu, first, I didn't know that it was a philosophical concept up until I reached my master's level in social work. But as a child, I noticed that Ubuntu is more like the aspect of myself considering the community and seeing myself in the community, in the family, and in everyone, seeing that human dignity. So, to come to think of, maybe to position it back to my childhood, it's said that I lost my father when I was only 1 year, 6 months. And my other father, when I say my other father, I mean my father's brother was my uncle. I then got to be nurtured by him. And I didn't notice the difference that my father was not there, my biological father. Because from Ubuntu, we say you're everyone's child. He took me into his house, treated me as his own son. So from there, I began to gain the concepts of UNU, the concept of Ubuntu, that you're not just your biological parent's child, you're also a village child. Him taking care of me as his own, there was no difference to tell. People in the community thought I was biologically his, and the family accepted me as that. And this is an example where I began to grow in Ubuntu. Going further to my paternal grandmother's side, I used to see her taking care of families, extended families, and also those that are coming from rural areas, also coming into towns, taking care of them. So I realize there's something in this philosophy of Ubuntu when reflecting back now that I know it's a philosophical concept to reflect on. So it traces back to my childhood in terms of appreciating the value systems of Ubuntu, the way of life of Ubuntu, and also incorporating it and integrating it to social work practices. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing those insightful background of how you got to interface with Ubuntu. And could you share some of the proverbs or sayings that depict Ubuntu from, besides Ono? You spoke of Ono. Could you share any other proverbs and sayings plus their meanings that really depict Ubuntu from Zimbabwe? You could share like two or three.
In terms of proverbs that relate to Ubuntu, there are so many, but I would start with one which says, Gudo peta muswe, vadiki vakuchke, which simply emphasizes on aspect to do with the baboon should humble itself so that the young ones could also cherish it and also respect it. It teaches mainly on humility. Other proverbs would then encounter aspects like Ukama, igashwa, unozadziswa nekudya. Our relatedness also relates to its aspects to do with food and sharing food together. It brings together our communality as a family, be it you're coming from my family or any other family. We are all related. We are all communing under one table. If I have food, we should share that food. If I have difficulties in terms of struggling, in terms of food insecurity, I should know where to tap to within the community setup. So those are rich proverbs for me that incorporate Ubuntu philosophy. So you'd have several proverbs that illustrate Ubuntu from an African perspective. You know, our language is very rich in terms of portraying humanity and our own humanness. Thank you, Eriya, for that question.
All right. You've spoken of Ukama, and I think Ukama theory is a very interesting theory, and I have heard of it. It comes, I think, deeply from Zimbabwe. Could you share more about it and how it relates to Ubuntu? Could you briefly share about it more?
Ukama theory is one of the major concepts of Ubuntu. Ukama simply means relatedness. Relatedness, that we are related mainly by blood. We are also related also beyond blood. We are also related ourselves in the community, beyond the communities. Relatedness is I also see myself as I see you. I should see my own humanness in you. It comes back to the Ubuntu axiom, I am because you are. When I talk of relatedness, in Latin, I would say homo sacra res homini, which simply means that I see the human sacredness and I respect the human sacredness. I see the image of the Creator in the humanness of another human being. So relatedness is not only limited to humans under the Ukama theory. As you shall read, you can tell it's expanded beyond our own human relatedness, how we relate also to non-human beings, how we relate to Mother Nature, how we relate also to the spiritual. So Ukama also talks to issues to do with aspects such as totems. You know, I'm Matemai, meaning that I am an elephant. I relate to elephants. So Chikwaka Matemai is my totem. So I relate mainly to elephants. I respect nature in that concept. So Ukama is broad and an important fundamental concept of Ubuntu philosophy. It speaks of our relatedness to both ourselves and to non-humans, as well as to spirituality issues. Thank you, Eriya, for that question.
Thank you so much, Robert, for sharing more about what Ukama is and how it relates to Ubuntu. And now let us discuss and talk about Ubuntu in research. And of course, I know you've done a lot of research around Ubuntu. And I know you've written about Ubuntu philosophy as a humanistic or extensional framework to fight against COVID-19 pandemic. And you've also written about environmental social work through African philosophy of Ubuntu, a conceptual analysis, and also you've written about utilizing Ubuntu in social work practice, Ubuntu in the eyes of multimodal approaches. And I would like to ask you, and I would like you to share about how did you use Ubuntu to shape your research? Could you share briefly about that? How did Ubuntu speak into your research? How did it define your research methodology, your research ethics, your research design, and everything about the research you did in regards to Ubuntu? Could you share about that?
Thank you so much. That talks back again to my PhD work, and I would love to express more on Ubuntu, but there's no one man that can express Ubuntu in any given conversation. We learn from each other in terms of Ubuntu. So when I talk of Ubuntu, I talk of Ubuntu with humility, knowing that there are also elders amongst us who know Ubuntu maybe better than I am. There are also people who have written more of Ubuntu than myself. But Ubuntu for me, it has informed also my lenses in terms of research, that each and every research should aim at enhancing life, enhancing the quality of life, enhancing the well-being of society, the well-being of individuals, family, communities. It will also address social justice issues in terms of the ethics of research. You see, research is all there to enhance life, not to oppress and aggravate health disparities or issues to do with social structural injustices. So I've utilized Ubuntu mainly as a philosophical concept, analyzing it also from Western theories. So Ubuntu analyzing Western theories to say how applicable is Ubuntu in Western theories, how applicable are Western theories in Ubuntu. Because you find, in as much as Western theories focus on individualization, Ubuntu focuses on communality, but there are commonalities within those paradigms, within those perspectives. So integrating this to come up with sort of a combined paradigm, to blend the two. So it informs me also to accept and also to reject certain elements from both philosophies. So utilizing critical theoretical analysis, you find Ubuntu is applicable in social work practices and all other helping disciplines such as psychology. You have seen Hanks in 2008 writing that the next movement should be Ubuntu in psychology. You have also seen other writers focusing on legislation and Ubuntu. All these are within the frameworks or the disciplines where social work tend to borrow from, because social work is eclectic and its research is also eclectic. So you find the relationship we have from an African perspective, focusing mainly on Ubuntu philosophy in terms of environmental social work, because we said Ukama can be extended further to non-humans. How can we shape environmental social work in line with the African philosophy of Ubuntu? And examining major themes emanating from environmental social work, trying to view them from an Ubuntu philosophy and way of life. So research is still new in terms of accepting Ubuntu. In as much as it has become universalized, there's still more to learn from Ubuntu. I think I would say I would stop there for now in terms of that research, just from a philosophical method, utilizing also critical theoretical appropriateness of Ubuntu in social work practice, as well as decolonizing social work research in terms of viewing social work from indigenous knowledge systems rather than only addressing westernized theories, and also addressing the power dynamics between these theories. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing more about how Ubuntu has shaped your research. And I've also seen you've done research around mental health. And could you briefly talk about what you did in regards to mental health and how Ubuntu shaped your research in mental health? How can Ubuntu be used to really help people that have mental health issues? Could you share about that as well?
Thank you so much. My background is also in mental health. I've been in mental health for more than 10 years. So Ubuntu, in terms of mental health, you would find in terms of the assessments that Ubuntu is holistic in its nature. It doesn't only focus on the individual. It has to focus also on the community, and it also integrates aspects to do with spirituality. Because for mental health practitioners and social workers, you realize that spirituality is a major element for our own recovery, for our own resilience, as it is a major source of hope, a major source of recovery, a major source also for our own well-being holistically. So in terms of addressing issues to do with behavior, you find Ubuntu is acceptable because of its ethical conduct. In terms of aspects to do with sensations, interpersonal relationships, cognition, and all other components in mental health, Ubuntu is also responsible and also adaptable in terms of such theoretical frameworks. But mainly now, Ubuntu aids aspects to do with personal relationship with the environment. You find most of our assessments do not consider the natural environment and its impact to our mental health. But Ubuntu now considers the natural environment, our relationship with the natural environment, our spirituality aspects in terms of how spirituality can impact on our mental health. So they need to be holistic in our assessment, not only assessing the individual, but assessing also their social milieu, which is the social environment, assessing also their natural environment, and also their spirituality, how spirituality is related to their recovery and to the causality of mental health. So we need to take a holistic picture in mental health assessment. From an African perspective, you'd learn that you could not treat the individual and leave out the environment. From an African perspective, if you treat the environment, you've got to treat the individual as well. If you treat the individual, you've got to treat the environment as well. So that relationship, bi-directional, interactive relationship, is important to consider within the African school of Ubuntu, our way of life, our philosophy, and our perspective. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing about how Ubuntu can be used in regards to supporting people with mental health, or in regards to supporting the philosophy of mental health and its practice. And let us discuss about the Ubuntu theory still. There is a Motsuhan researcher called Chilisa, and she says that Ubuntu humanizes and decolonizes research. So from your perspective, how do you think Ubuntu does humanize or decolonize research, and in what ways does it do so? Could you share about that?
That's a lot to share about, and it's a good question you're raising. It a very critical question. You'll find Ubuntu humanizes research in that it values human dignity. Therefore, it doesn't do harm to the participants. It doesn't aim to do harm to the participants. It also focuses on aspects to do with going a further mile rather than just doing research, linking people to resource systems. Because we are human, we should also be empathy driven, compassion driven. Whereas other researchers could only do the research and have nothing to do with furthering the life of the people. Ubuntu-informed research would then go further than research to connect people within resource systems. You find much of the time when preparing participants for research, people would then engage even in emotional issues, trying to learn more about life of the participants, trying to practice from an empathy perspective, trying to connect heart to heart. So it's not just mind to mind, it's also the inside person, the human in me connecting with the participants, connecting with the humans in them, trying to address power dynamics as well, being at par with the participants. That in as much as I know the theories, they have the lived experiences. So we are all at par. In as much as I am within the academic space, there are the experts of their own lived experiences. So integrating these knowledge systems is what Ubuntu research is based about, is what brings humanness to the face of research from a Ubuntu perspective. In terms of decoloniality, I could say decolonial social work research is a broader field, which I cannot explain in 5 minutes, but I would rather need a whole day unpacking
You can just
decolonial social
briefly
work
share
research.
about you may just
Yes.
briefly share about how you think Ubuntu decolonizes research. Just briefly.
Ubuntu, by the way, if I remember well, Van Breda 2019 says Ubuntu traces back. It connects us from the past, the present, and the future. So decolonial social work in research is also trying to see how the past, in terms of colonization, slavery, has impacted us in the present day life. What are the traumas involved within the past? Carrying out longitudinal studies as part of decolonizing these aspects, and also trying to see how these aspects are going to shape the future of people. In terms of social work theories, the inclusivity of indigenous knowledge systems in terms of social work research, practice, and education is part of decolonizing social work, of which Ubuntu calls for acknowledging each and every person's human dignity. One way to acknowledge anyone's dignity is also to pay attention to their knowledge systems, paying attention to their cultural values. So cultural sensitivity there, issues to do with addressing racism, xenophobia, a part of decolonial social work practices, all emerging from value systems of Ubuntu, seeing the other person as I see myself, seeing their own humanness as I see my own humanness. Therefore, if I misjudge someone, I'm also misjudging myself. Another paper I wrote was on how Ubuntu perceives someone who's a racist to be also dehumanizing themselves. So I say it's a political connotation as well, where we talk of decolonial social work and Ubuntu philosophy, because Ubuntu is not just good. Ubuntu is not just good in its facial expression. Ubuntu can also be radical. It can also trace and unravel the colonial systems, because Ubuntu, you find it in apartheid. Ubuntu, you find it in wars fighting colonization. Ubuntu is also political. So you find Ubuntu is deep. If we are to go under the surface of Ubuntu, you find also Ubuntu could be radical in some sort, to some degree. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert, for sharing about how Ubuntu can decolonize and how it humanizes research. And now let's dive into our other discussion about Ubuntu globally. And could you tell us about what you think can be done to increase Ubuntu in its use and practice in regards to laws, in organizational plans, in policies, in ethics, in curricula and fieldwork manuals? How can the use of Ubuntu be increased in this?
Thank you so much. That's so broad a question, Eriya. Today, I'll unpack it from the acronym PESTEL. From political perspectives, Ubuntu is democratic. It involves the voices of the voiceless, the voices of the people. It doesn't foster itself mainly on oppressive practices. So when Ubuntu is involved, there's reconciliation, there's also moving forward behind past experiences. I was talking earlier on about colonization, trying to address those traits of the colonial era that are still present post-colonial period. So Ubuntu also incorporates the value systems within the political structures. It's unfortunate that in most nations where Ubuntu is practiced, we don't see it in the political arena. Ubuntu, when considered politically, speaks about Africa becoming one, United States of Africa. So when we talk of Ubuntu in everyday life, we should be pushing for that political agenda for Africa to become one. That political agenda that I can travel to any African nation without showing them my passport, without applying any visa. That's Ubuntu advocacy in day-to-day life. Afrocentrism, that we are one. So Ubuntu is deep in that political arena. Economically, Ubuntu should be addressing aspects such as austerity, neoliberalism. That Ubuntu comes from a communal perspective. In as much as Ubuntu promotes hard work, Ubuntu also devalues aspects such as economic injustices. Let there be a fair field for everyone to be able to utilize community resource systems. We are talking of issues to do with mines, issues to do with natural resources, and how are they being utilized? Are they being utilized for individual benefits, or they're being utilized for the national benefit, the continental benefit, benefiting for everyone, or just a few are benefiting from Ubuntu, where social work is also involved in suppressing others, because social workers sometimes we become not only victims, but also perpetrators of certain injustices like that. So Ubuntu informed social work in day-to-day practices also considers all these elements, aspects to do with society, socially, our day-to-day relatedness within the introduction of extended families, thinking of ourselves in the workplace, how are we ethically expressing Ubuntu. And then technologically, you'd find that aspects to do with day-to-day life, there's Facebook, there's also aspects to do with Snapchats, aspects to do with LinkedIn, where day-to-day people are interacting from all global perspectives in terms of globalization. Ubuntu has its own space. Ubuntu has its own space. According to Mkumbate, Shereni, and Nyanguru, they also spoke about how Ubuntu and technology could be interconnected. Now we have digital platforms called Ubuntu, which is wonderful, trying to share Ubuntu within the platform of technology, enhancing human dignity, enhancing human life, which is also good. Then legally, you have constitutions that incorporate aspects to do with Ubuntu within their value systems, within their axiology, within their day-to-day practice within their national policies. For example, Ubuntu or Hunu is a value of social work practice in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, I understand, and in other nations, which I may not have come across with, but I'm just mentioning examples that I've noted Ubuntu Hunu as a value system within the national framework of social workers in Zimbabwe. Then also the environment. How are we taking care of the environment? How are we fighting climate change? How are we fighting the management of natural resources again? So putting it across this acronym enables us to have a holistic approach to the utility of Ubuntu in day-to-day life, and thinking not only of ourselves, but thinking of those that are disadvantaged, thinking as social workers of our day-to-day social work reflections. How oppressive are we in terms of utilizing the title social work? I know the title comes with its power, with its authority, but how do we remain human and face our service users with that humanity, talking heart to heart with them, soul to soul with them in our day-to-day reflections? I would go so on and so on, Eriya, but I understand you have valuable time, and thank you for that question. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Robert, for sharing about how Ubuntu can be increased in its use and practice. And now let us discuss about Ubuntu globally. And I have a double-barrel question for you. So do you think Ubuntu can coexist with Western individualism? Can the two of them coexist, or they cannot coexist? And why do you think so? It's a double-barrel question for you.
Question. But I'll answer it from a paradox, which says Ubuntu is also promoting individualism to a certain degree. If you look at I am because you are, it starts with I am. There's an element of individuality there. So, but the focus is not on the individuality, it's also on our relatedness. So to say Ubuntu is not to some degree individualistic, we could be having a misconception there. But that is from my own understanding and my own interpretation of those axioms. But it's a good question to say we know there's a larger degree of individualism within the Western theories, but to say Ubuntu can coexist with these theories is the right way to say, because it is the nature of reality. It is what it is. Ubuntu can coexist. It depends which degree now, in terms of the extent to which one wants to perceive life. But there is also an element of individuality in Ubuntu. I'm coming with this not to confuse our viewers, but the viewers should also think critically. Can I say I am because you are without considering I am? Thank you.
There is the aspect of I am because we are, where it speaks of it in the communal basis. I don't know how that intersects with your orientation of that. I don't know what you think about that too. Of I am
Yes.
because we are. It speaks of the communal
I
approach of
am because we are. I've started with I am. But at the same time, it goes on to say we are because I am. So there's an element there which I would say it starts with me to realize that I cannot do without the community. At the same time, the community expects me to have responsibilities. So there is an element of responsibility again in Ubuntu philosophy. I'm more responsible not just to myself, but to others. But the individuality and individualness of Ubuntu goes beyond looking at myself from selfish perspectives. It considers my individualness, but in a more generous way, to say I am because of others, giving myself also to service to others. In as much as I understand my own humanness, I also say, I see my own humanness in you, therefore I am to serve you. It goes back to the theological aspect of service that Jesus says, I am. I'm sorry to get there because Ubuntu, from also proponents of Ubuntu, such as Bishop Tutu from South Africa, also speaks of Ubuntu as an African theology. So I'm tending also to focus on that, to address Ubuntu from a theological perspective. I am who I am, but I'm at your service. Have I complicated or ironed out things there?
You're sharing your perspective, and yes.
Yes.
Yes. So I have one more last question for you before we wind up this discussion. And do you think should Ubuntu be told to outsiders? Should we export it like it was, how the whites or people from the global north, they try to export their culture to us as well. So do you think Ubuntu should be taught to outsiders, or it is only meaningful within its cultural context? What do you think?
That's
Do
a
you
good
think
question, Eriya. I think with
do you
this
think
platform,
yes.
Ubuntu is being shared globally, where I feel this should be the norm. And we should also try to capture what Ubuntu is from other perspectives. We should try also to reflect Ubuntu with other people who are outside of Africa, people in Germany, people in Australia, because somehow they may experience Ubuntu, but they have different names of it. Where maybe from a value system, the values also share commonalities. And where do these philosophies diverge? So sharing Ubuntu is a positive thing. Sharing Ubuntu, because of globalization, we experience Ubuntu when we are migrating. We experience Ubuntu also through technology. So sharing it is also part of our responsibility. Those like you and myself, we have experienced Ubuntu from diverse perspectives. Ubuntu coming from South Africa, we have experienced it also in Zimbabwe as UNU. You have experienced it also in different names. So bringing those mindsets together, like we are sharing today in this conversation, is important, so that we also appreciate indigenous knowledge systems. You find the Global Agenda for Social Work internationally now involves respecting indigenous knowledge systems. Ubuntu as an indigenous knowledge system should be respected and shared accordingly. And to share Ubuntu is also not to be mistaken as undermining other indigenous knowledge systems, but it is exemplary to say indigenous knowledge systems, yes, they've got a space in the social work fraternity, in the social work knowledge base, and can actually inform social work practice. So sharing Ubuntu globally is not to undermine other indigenous knowledge systems, but it's an exemplary to say, yes, this can be done. Thank you, Eriya.
Thank you so very much, Robert, for taking off time to be part of this discussion. And I would like to find out from you, do you have anything else to say as we wind this up, or do you have any literature you would wish to share that is, of course, depicting Ubuntu that the viewers can maybe benchmark from?
Yes, I would say there's an IFSW, International Federation Social Work book, which is called, I'll paraphrase the title, Ubuntu Social Work Practitioners, which is also free on IFSW. if people could also reflect on that. It was authored by several people across the globe on Ubuntu. That book also enlightens me in terms of Ubuntu practices across the globe. There's also several books on Ubuntu, not only related to social work, but there's also Ubuntu and Sustainable Development Goals, music and Ubuntu. There are several elements that we can learn from books even produced beyond social work practice, because social work is eclectic. I would mention also to say there are several books on Ubuntu and disabilities, trying to see how people across the globe are practicing in terms of working with people with disabilities from an Ubuntu-informed social work practice. So I hope that helps also our viewers in terms of interacting more and more, and also encouraging people to interact more on this platform. I've seen more practitioners. I learn a lot from this platform. As an academic also, I tap to theories in this platform, which is wonderful. Thank you so much for the job that you're doing. Thank you, Eriya.
All right. Thank you so much, Robert. I want to say asante nisana. Thank you so much for being part of this discussion.
Thank you.
And I highly believe that the rest of the viewers around the world are going to learn a lot about Ubuntu from your knowledge, from your expertise, and from your experience. I want to thank you so much, and I wish you a very good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Eriya. Have a good afternoon and enjoy the rest of your day.